then it changes dramatically. And the forces that be, because I do know them, because I've met a lot of the players, they don't want you to know this little bit. A lot of people don't. That you are really the hidden monks in so many different ways. It's not just a statement, it's the truth of the matter. And we're going to dive into it a lot. You know, and as we grab a cup of coffee, because we've been going a while, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about sort of what do we do with consciousness? How do we take consciousness and what do we even think about it? I mean, you know, have you thought about that lately? And here's what the best physicists in the world say, and Max Planck, long gone, you know, but he said that everything comes out of consciousness. Everything. In other words, there's purposeful thinking. There's something going on. There's an awareness. There is an awareness out there that is aware of everything. That is conscience. We could call that God too. Now think about that. Physicists give it a different name, but it really is the same. You know, names are symbols to express ideas. That is the idea. You know, consciousness is in everything, and all form comes out of it. That's what physics says. That's the expression of God through whatever tradition you're following. When they try to explain what God is, it's usually explained that way. There's another way too, and this is kind of handy, because there's a lot of people that even if I give you the physics, you're going to say, I still don't believe in God. That's okay, you don't have to. But you can believe, and everyone believes, in love. And God describes himself on earth in that one word, love. And so that makes love a noun, doesn't it, in that sense, or in that use, if it's the name of God. But it's also a verb, and we use it in the world as a verb to express action, a very powerful action. So within the context of that very powerful action is consciousness. That's what it is, as it describes itself. And how could it be anything else? What's the opposite of creation? Non-creation? No, it's even taking something apart is a creative effort. So creation is the essence, the underlying source of it all. And I'm going to walk, as we walk through the library, I'm going to walk in and get a cup of coffee, because my normal routine in the day, as I think about my day, you know, rolling into the day, it's about first thing, get some protein and some water. First, the water in your system, get some hydration going because you've been dehydrated. And coffee's not the best item, you know, because it does dehydrate you. So you want to be drinking water. You'll see them laying around all here because we're going to load me up today. But you should take protein first. A boiled egg is a real handy one. You can keep them handy, and people are always in a rush. Start it with that, not the caffeine. That's what I did before we started today. And what that does is kick your body in so that it's doing its work, and its energy source is food, protein, and it's not caffeine. Because what will happen here is your adrenals will kick in, and you'll be running on them all day long. You can't kind of reset it. So set it right up. Protein first. Boil eggs at the beginning of the week. Make it your Sunday evening ritual. Boil a dozen eggs. Have at least 2 every morning on your way to work. Quick, easy, peel them at night if you have to, but make it possible for you to get the right thing in at the right time. Then the coffee. About 15 minutes later. Best sequence. Cold water, metabolism kicks in. Protein, egg, perfect. That kicks in. Then go ahead and do your coffee or tea or your morning ritual. And for me, there's a ritual too. And we didn't cover it for this broadcast. And as my producer and I began to talk about what to do with this, we decided to save that for another time. But I want you to know there is a practice when I wake up in the morning that I engage. And it's prayer. It's my own practice. And I think everyone should develop a practice. We're going to talk about that too as we go on during the day. But let me turn on my grinder for just a second. And I do this routine because I like my coffee right and fresh, so everything is always kind of refrigerated. And when I grind it, I like it ground fresh. And then I'm fortunate enough to have this thing that came with the house, and it gives me automatic hot water every time, which I love it, you know, because whether you're a tea drinker or a coffee drinker like me, you don't have to hassle it. And I'm usually by myself because I work alone most of the time and no one else shares my house. with me most of the time. But the whole idea, it's almost a calming thing. By the time I've come here, I pour my coffee, I'm relaxing. I got the fragrance of this coffee, which is really excellent for the guys that are helping me today. And but it is kind of my morning deal. And then I always have to grab one and drip all over the place, which I end up doing. But it is a ritual, and I'll usually drink a couple of these in the morning, usually about 4 of them, to be honest about it. But I can always squeeze 2 out of each filter. And that's me again. And they go, well, why are you using a paper towel? They actually work better than the other ones, and so that's what I do. And it's just quirky Nick. But you know, the thing about all of it, you should have a way to come into your day. And we're going to talk about some aspects of that. Because your day should set what you're going to do, you know, instead of being this panicked rush. And I know how it is with kids. You know, I had 6 of my own. And you know, when you're in that panicked race, yeah, I get it. But there are a couple moments, and one of them is when you're in the bathroom. Usually you get that few minutes by yourself as you're finishing things up. And so I'll give a practice later in the day that I do in the morning. That's a way of connecting with myself before I start my day. And so I'm going to share that later. And the other thing I do is when I go into my bath, I don't do the shower, I actually do a bath. And it's both a practice as well as a bath, because what I do there is I pray, I clean myself, I wash myself, but I also pray. And I do it verbally, with my mouth speaking words, not in my head. And I'll explain why I do it that way and why I think it's important to do it that way as we go on. But again, setting the day up, as hectic as it all is, 1 minute that you get alone can make all the difference, and will make all the difference in the way your day rolls on. The other thing that I do is I have a practice at the end of the day, and depending on how we all do today, we'll get into a little bit of that, but just a glimpse. And I thought about it because that's really that's for a different teaching for another day. And what we're doing today is try to give an overview of everything and enough practice, enough keys. But then we'll come back in at a future time and really dial into each area. But I want to give a comprehensive package so we can see maybe a bigger possibility for individually ourselves, and then maybe there's something that we can do in the outer world that makes sense. But I'm not going to define a lot of that. I'm going to present ideas. I'm going to present some really controversial ones. I'm going to present some insights into what I've seen to perhaps us to see things just a little bit differently. So let's go back and jump right back into what we're about to do for the day. And I'm going to switch places and be a little more at my normal kind of workstation, because this is the day station for me. Is normally what happens is it's nice and neat now, and then as I go through the day, this thing starts piling up with notes and papers, because the way I'll work during the day is I'll move between projects, and my phone doesn't ring very often, but when it does, it moves me between projects, and I usually have a few different things going on. And then I'm thinking about things all the time, or I'm in conversations with people that are big thinkers, because I'll normally have 2 of these a day, 2 conversations a day with someone in the world for probably an hour or hour and a half each. And we're not complaining about things, and we're not gossiping about people. We're talking about ideas and things going on in the world, and how those things might be better served by something that we could do. And then that becomes the notes and the information that I use for radio broadcasts, for what I do is my public work. And what a lot of people don't know is I haven't made any money on my public work in probably 10 years. I make it on the other things. What I do, this is what occupies almost 80% of my time, because I'm really blessed. I'm able to make my living in a way that allows me a lot of flexibility, so I can travel a lot, and I spend a lot of time doing what I would call research, and it is, because ultimately it works into information. But here's how I look at my life. I don't have a job as such. I have a livelihood, a way of making my living. That includes a lot of different little bits and pieces. so that I have the freedom to do what I really enjoy doing. And I've managed to do that, configure a life that allows me to do that, at least right now. And here's what I know too, is I hit 62 last year. So now I can even retire technically, right? I'm that age. I'm not going to, I have no intention to until you burn me up and scatter my ashes. But up until then, I got a lot to do, and I'm as healthy as I've ever been. Now this is kind of interesting too. My health reset about 4 or 5 months ago, and so I've lost weight. I've gained muscle mass now back, and I'm actually the same weight and the same general health as I was when I worked on the pipeline all those years ago. I turned 18 out there. The friends I had there are friends I still have. In fact, I'll be seeing them next month in Southern California, a few of them. But when I look at all of this, and consciousness, again, as the theme to pick this back up and talk about, when you think about this thing that Max Planck was talking about, and you think about, and I think about friends in my context of how I look at time generally. Most people budget their money, right? They plan every nickel, how they're going to do it. But it's really the wrong thing. You should be budgeting your life, your time, planning how you want to use your time, and then deciding how much material things it takes to feed that. And then you live a life that has life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in it. Because you're planning your life around what you're going to do, and how you're going to live, and how you're going to frame your gifts in terms of who you are as a living soul, as a human being. That's worth doing. But doing a monetary budget is an exercise after that, not before that. We get it all confused. These are the little things I'm talking about that I'm going to bring up as keys all the way through this. Because these are the things that we do routinely, just doing them routinely, and we do it every month, and we go through the note. Hey, wait a minute. I'm saying let's break that routine and budget our lives differently. And then we're starting to function differently when we do that. Now we're not worrying about shortage, we're thinking about, oh, what am I going to be doing next? It's a very different way of thinking. If you're always worried about the money, then you'll always be short of it, and you'll always never have enough of it. But I want to get into some of the way the consciousness sort of works into this conversation. When I think about what Planck was saying, was when I go back to when I started in gemology, one of the things that really fascinated me was light. The physics of light and what happened, and what a crystal was, as I mentioned in that intro. A crystal is the outward expression of the internal arrangement of atoms. That's what forms a crystal shape, is that. Within crystal structures, there are 6 basic structures, and then there's a 7th, which is considered amorphous. And so the structures have to do with the way things line up. Like you think about 3-dimensional shapes, you got a line going down, and you got a line going across, line going there, and so you get a 3-dimensional shape. For the cubes, like a cube, a square, they're all equal and all 90 degrees, but they can have a lot of different shapes outside. They can look like a cube, or they can look like a 4-sided pyramid base to base, where it's like this on top and like this on bottom. What's called an octahedron, or it can be a dodecahedron, which is a round, almost looks like a ball, but it has 12 surfaces on it. So you can have different shapes, but still have this basic structure. So within all those different shapes, there's 217 of them that can replicate into 3-dimensional objects, crystals. We're just talking minerals, crystals. And then there's amorphous, which means no crystal structure at all. It just kind of flows, not a real crystalline structure. So within all of that, what struck me also was, then what forms that? You know, what forms the atoms that form that? And an atom, as you know, is mainly empty space, which means everything here we're perceiving as solid or a liquid or even a gas is got mostly empty space, the most solid thing, the most dense thing, the most tightly packed thing is still mainly empty space. And then behind that is what? Consciousness, energy into form. This is one of the key principles of how it all works. Everything works. Everything comes out of energy into form. And when I mentioned in that bit of a discussion about wave fronts, acoustic wave fronts interacting to form geometric shapes. What got me in that conversation with one of my mentors, Reho, when I presented at the International Biorhythm Research Association that paper and I met him. Well, that three-dimensional shape that you can create with wave fronts creates standing waves, and out of that perhaps is how matter appears. And this is the idea. Out of consciousness, things get set up, matter forms, and then that matter comes into form, into something. So consciousness comes into matter, into form, and then you have all these physical things. Now out of that, you get this, you get a lot of things that happen. I want to talk about two principles along this line. I want to talk about non-locality and quantum entanglement as they relate to human beings. What is this about? What non-locality is saying is that you can be in two different places, very separated by huge distances, and yet what happens here affects this over here, like immediately, with no time lag that would be implied by the space distance. So time and space, for some reason, don't operate in non-locality. The other thing is, once two particles or two people are entangled, come together, you're always there, if you can take that principle out that far. In other words, everyone you've ever met, everyone you've ever touched, everyone you've ever interrelated with, you're entangled with on some level. In other words, their energy and your energy move together. What I say to everyone that's ever worked with me on any level, in fact, everyone that's ever heard me and done something in terms of spending some time with me, we're entangled in that way. We're engaged in that way. You go with me in my work, I go with you in yours. It's not a theory, it's a fact of science. And that makes it very different, doesn't it? When you realize that you really are part of each other because of each of those engagements, including the person you meet randomly, because this is another way of seeing it. If you're coming out of that, then there's also another way to look at this, and that's through the idea of a holographic universe and a multiverse. And what are those? Those are, again, quantum physics and physics concepts. The holographic universe goes back to several people, one in particular, Richard Alan Miller, who's one of my dear friends. He's a little wild. He's like really wild, okay, because most of the geniuses I know are. But the holographic universe takes this kind of idea that within us, perhaps, is a hologram of the whole. In other words, if you take a hologram, you start whacking it up into small bits, you still see the image of the whole thing. So think about yourself, and many traditions say this, that we're created in the image and likeness of God, the image and likeness of the Creator. Well, what does that mean? Does he look like us? I hope not, because some of us look pretty funny, and all of us do at different times of our lives. And so I would say, no, it's not about that. In fact, I'll tell you why it's not about that, because this body, when you were this big, when you were born and you were this big, there's not a single cell left in you from that. Now, so that's not you, really, is it? I mean, every 7 years or so, every cell in the body's gone and replaced. So what's the you in that? It's the energy, and you come into form, and your energy state changes and your form changes as you get older, and we call that getting older and growing up, and that's what we do. That's how it works. You watch plants. What are they doing? They're taking sun, minerals, alchemy. Alchemy takes place, if you want to use that word, and they change it into something else. You can watch it by the day here in the summer when the sun's going 20 hours. You can measure, you can almost hear a patch of cabbages moving. They grow so fast. But the fact is, it moves into form based on the energy that feeds it and the chemistry and the biology and all the other things we know about. And again, creation works energetically. When we think about some of that, again, vibration, right? And in most traditions, it deals with spoken words, not thought words, spoken words. Why is that important? Well, This is a physical reality where vibration brings things into form as a basic creative component. Words, thoughts bring things into form. When you connect emotion, we'll get into that, it does even more. When you add intent and you know what you're doing, it adds even more. So thinking about what we are as consciousness, that we reflect the whole thing within us as conscious creators with that consciousness. Now makes us different than how we perceive this glass of water, which isn't, as we see it, consciously participating in anything but being here, being a holder of water and the water being in it. But you are different and I'm different in that we can co-create. We can take our spark of consciousness, our hologram of the complete consciousness within us, and decide to do something or not. Because we have one thing, the ability to choose also. That's really a big deal, because we can choose how we see things, or we can choose how we do things, or we can choose how we think about those things, and they could all three be totally different. Because thinking and feeling, go try and grab one and shove it in a box. Can't do it. It's something else, and we're going to talk more about that a little bit later. But talking about the creator and creation, so let's, and I'll take this further than some might want to go, but let's do this, because quantum physics says it's all consciousness. There's reasons for believing in a holographic universe. And I'd already mentioned coming into this as we met for coffee that love as a verb and love as a noun. And so if we could, those that just don't want to go anywhere with the word God or creator, I'll give you that. Just use love and substitute it in your own mind. If I'm using one, I'm using the other. But creator and creation. And then you get this thing, everything's spoken. It wasn't God thought, it was said, spoke, a word, boom. Words matter, words create vibration. Vibration is what, in fact, can create form if you know what you're doing. So this is important. Intention is important. It gets wrapped up in that because when creation was being created, there was always intention about doing something. And part of what got created was duality and union all at the same time. And a dualistic system is what we see within the world: hot, cold, up, down, left, right, female, male. I mean, it's a place of duality. And I'm going to talk a bit about that. But in dualistic systems, you still have to realize that underlying it is one thing. So there's 2 plus 1. There is a 1 in 3 scenario here. That needs to be remembered. It's like 3 separate things, and yet together. Because when I talk about the individual, which we'll get in next, we're 2 separate things, even within an individual, but we'll get into that. So duality, there's always 2 questions, and I'll tell you what they are. I'll cheat a little bit and jump ahead. There's always 2 questions we should ask when we're thinking a thought. What am I thinking, and how do I feel about it? So there's always 2 questions to get both sides of the brain working. There's always 2 witnesses. If you think about it, if you want to be credible, you always have 2 people to verify things. There's always 2 directions. There's always an up and down, and there's always a hot and cold. But I'd say this about that. If this is hot and this is cold, and this is the line where it gets hotter and colder, where does hot begin for you, and where does cold begin for you? Right? If this is a line that says up and down, where does the up part of the line begin, and where does the down part begin? Again, that's up to you. So a lot of the things that we are deciding on a line of reality, we might be dropping on anywhere along that line and just think we're in the middle or think we're on one end of it. And what I would suggest is that our perception of the reality we're in, as we talk about today, we're going to realize that the eyes, the ears, the nose, the taste, the touch, these have limits. Those are the physical limits of the physical body that we'll be talking about in terms of perception. Thinking, the idea of thinking and feeling is a function that we call the brain or the mind, and it's one we can't touch. And we're going to talk a lot about that too. The universe, as we think about what creation was doing, so out of nothingness comes consciousness, and out of that comes form, and the universe gets created, and then there's the story of the creation of the earth, and then there's the creation of human beings, of living souls, is the way that's characterized. And if you think about living souls occupying physical form, bodies, we're going to talk about that. Because I think we get confused here also in terms of what are we, as I said before. I think about God in a different way too. You know, a lot of the stories that we read and the histories, we think about this guy with a bat, you know, that's just beating us into this way of being. And I don't see that. I see this very differently. I see the Creator as a father figure, a parental figure, if you will, someone that cares deeply about me, that isn't identified by gender, but is identified with a deep love for me and for everything in creation. Not just the me's and the you's in creation, but everything in creation as an expression of the very creation itself. And so I think about that more of a friendly manner, and you'll hear a lot about that, because I think that's what creation wants from us, is a friendly relationship, not a hostile one. That's what we see in the world, as a hostile relationship with the creation. When I think about the creation itself, and there was a guy that passed this on, and I thought it was a great illustration, as just an illustration or a metaphor, a way to think about it. If you think about creation goes, hey, I'm gonna create free choice and create these things that are going to kind of be like me, but not really, but they're going to have free choice like me and run around and make choices. Well, that's kind of a scary thought if you've ever had children. Sooner or later they're going to make their own choices, and I think that's kind of the situation. You're going to create this situation, and now you got choices, and now what are they going to decide? Well, maybe, and God at the same time kind of wants that surprise element, but how do you surprise God, right? And so maybe it's like this, that through these bodies, that somehow it's like a fluorescent light effect where it kind of flickers on and off fast enough where you never notice. But maybe on one end, God's looking out of our eyes, and on the other end, we're looking out of our eyes. And it's happened so fast, we just think it's us, and He knows better. But the point is, experiencing through us also is how the Creator experiences, through His creation, and we're it on a lot of levels. And with that, and this is where I want to cut through the branding, because I think all religious branding has been screwed up. And I call it branding because that's really what it's become. And it's resulted in a loss of truth rather than the capturing of it in so many levels, because too much of the wars that have been fought in the last 6,000 years, 4,000 of them have been about religion. And all of those religions have talked about love if they had the franchise on it. And so when I look at religious branding, I'm going to say this about that. All the brand names have failed in every possible way if they have not left people with a sense of hopefulness, a sense of love, and a sense of compassion that extends beyond themselves. And if that hasn't happened, then they've failed. And anyone who wants to defend that failure can do so, but not with me. I have nothing to say there except to recognize where failure is and recognize where truth is also. And I hope as we go through, fragments of your truth get revealed to you, not mine. And not any specific path am I going to point to except your own, the one you choose for you. Because that's the only one worth doing, and that's the only one worth living, and that's the only one you're going to get to do, is your own life, because everyone else is taken. And that's a funny saying, but it came out of a guy in Hawaii, and it's a good one because it's true. And what I would say is there's a couple ways this has been approached, and I want to, by all of these faiths, no matter whether you're crashing through someone's culture like happened here in Alaska and everywhere else in the world, and deciding your brand is better, whatever that one was, And then people say, they talk about a couple of words and they use them pretty uselessly in my sense, is they use the word a witness. And then they knock on your door and want to witness to you. You've heard this happen. In the West, it happens a lot. And then they want to have a testimony. They want to tell you with their mouth, whatever it is they want to tell you. But they're knocking on your door, all right? And they want to knock on your door. And I want you to think about this if you're one of those guys knocking on my door. Your right is not to knock on anybody's door. Why do you think you can come to some stranger's house and want to have the deepest discussion that they'll ever have with anyone? You want to dive into their relationship with God. Whoa, how arrogant is that? To first assume that the person on the other end of that door doesn't have a relationship with God. That's pretty arrogant. And second, to think it's your job to make sure they do. And I don't think that's true. I think it's their job to decide whatever they're going to decide. And if you want to be a witness, then you live a life that somebody goes, wow, look at that person's life. And then they ask you a question. But when you knock on the door and you brand name yourself, whatever that is, and you fail, everyone says, see, that brand is a failure. That brand fails, not that person. Because you're out with a name tag that you don't need. Live a life, make your mistakes, clean up your act, and that's what demonstrates a real witness, is how a life is lived. What interests me about people is not how they succeed, but what they do after they miserably fail. Do they get back up, dust themselves off, and maintain their value platform as they rebuild their lives? Can they do that with joy? Can they dust themselves off and turn their disaster at some point into something different? That's what's worth doing. Because that's what this world is about, and that's what a good parent would do, is teach. With the easy lessons first, and if they're not heard, the hard lessons next. But the choices are ours, and the branding needs to go, and we need to start thinking about what we are as a created human being. And if you believe what I believe, which is when I look in the eyes of a human being, I see a living soul. That's what I identify with as a person. I'll talk more about it later. But that's what's in there. And because I do that, because I believe that person is created in the image and likeness of God, just like I am, I have to respect them. To not do that would be just insane. It's like not even in the mix. Now, I might get agitated by what I'm hearing, but I want to know. People don't just say things, well, sometimes, I suppose, but there's a reason they say things. I want to know what it is. Because then I can understand something about the person if I can listen to what it is and know what it is that makes them believe that. Now I'm going to learn a few things there. I'm going to learn either what I'm ignorant of, and now I may believe differently, or I'm going to know where their hole is, what they're missing that I might be able to inform. But I'm going to wait to figure out whether there is a hole or whether it's with me. And that's a big difference. That's respect at a level that allows for a difference. And when I think about this country, the world, what we hoped for 250 years ago was that level of respect, that we would have all these different people from all these different religious backgrounds. Remember, people fled persecution because of what you believed in. No one was going to tell anyone on this continent what to believe. Now think about what's going on all around you right now. Everybody wants to tell you what to believe. I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to give you is a bunch of ideas and thoughts and how I integrate them, and I'm going to give you keys that work because I've done them. But the decisions about what is useful to you, how do I know what's useful to you? Your path is totally different than mine and will be, expect it to be. And whatever path a person follows towards their own enlightenment is going to be 7 or 8 billion of them played out on this planet. Because every one of us has these attributes that all of my science shows me, that verifies and confirms for me that the science bears out the possibilities, but the choices are our own. And that's where this thing gets really exciting. And in the next segment that we get into, it's going to be about the individual, about companionship and being stewards in the earth, and how we might start to reshape some of the things we're seeing, starting with ourselves, how to go in, go deep, and find a way to express the essence of what each of us have been created to be. Because we are way, way underestimating our possibilities. And it is time. It's time to awaken. It's time to awaken to what we are as living souls. So let's take a break.